Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon. Yes, I'm Tim, and I would like to talk to you today about scaling team contributions in open source projects or in internal teams. So, very short introduction. I use Puppet since 2012, roughly, and I'm actively in the community since 2015, so that's some time. And yep, it's really nice to work with it, so I stayed with it, and that evolved over time. Before we talk about the actual issue that we have with scaling, I would like to introduce you to Vox Pupuli and what we are and what we do. Vox Pupuli is a big collective of open source maintainers for Puppet modules. Maintaining open source software on your own is pretty hard. It takes a lot of time, especially if your open source project gets actually used by other people. At the first moment, that's nice, but in the second moment, you notice that people raise issues, they raise feature requests. You would like to please them, but that takes a lot of time, and it's easier as a big collective. And well, some time ago, 2016, we did the first talk about Vox Pupuli and explain to the people what we are and that everybody can contribute and work as a collective. And every time we do a talk about us, we write down how many maintainers we have, or how many people are in the community or in our GitHub organization, basically. And yeah, that grows over time. At the moment, we are close to 160. You see a small gap between last year of May and now, because, well, COVID happened and nobody did a talk. Yeah, so that's a nice graph. And you see we are a lot of people, and that could be compared to a mid-sized organization with an ops team of 150 people, for example. A lot of people maintaining a lot of code, and those are only the people that are actually in our GitHub organization and have merge access to all the different repositories. We get contributions and issues from over 1,000 people that are, well, just participating. And we all do this in our free time and our spare time, and we would like to work efficiently. So what do we do in Vox Pupuli? So first off, we do a lot of yak shaving, basically. Tedious work, clean up tasks. And some of those tasks I would like to show you and explain to you. And you might notice that they are familiar to the stuff that you might do in your own corporate organization. First off, a Puppet module, in most cases, depends on other Puppet modules. The standard lib module from Puppet Labs is probably the most well-known one. And here's another one from Puppet Labs, the VCS repo one, which allows you to clone Git repositories. It's a common practice in a Puppet module that you specify all the dependencies that you have, like this in a metadata.json file. And you define a lower boundary for the dependent version and an upper boundary. So if there's a new major release, like it happened here, the 5.0 release a few days ago, the version requirement isn't certified anymore. So if you install all the dependencies, you get one, but it's not the latest one. So it needs to be tested again. Does your module work with the latest VCS repo? If that's the case, the metadata.json needs to be updated. Sounds quite easy. It is actually. But if you notice that you have this dependency in 150 modules, that's still a lot of time that's required. And it's rarely the case that one Puppet module depends on only one. So often it depends on multiple ones. So that's a lot of work and a lot of time that's required to test all the changes. Another example, also in the metadata.json, is the Puppet version range. That's a bit of an older one that says it works on Puppet 5. That's now end of life. So you might want to remove that and say the lowest one that we support and test on is 6 or something. Puppet 7 was released some month ago. So you maybe want to test that as well and support it. So the 7 needs to be raised to an 8. So you have two changes here that also it needs to be tested if those actually work, and it needs to be updated in every module that you maintain. And there are a few organizations like Vox Pupuli itself, or also Puppet Labs, that generate the CI matrix based on the versions that are listed in the metadata.json. So if I want to test on the newest Puppet version, I need to update my metadata.json. That's a quite important change to do, and it shouldn't be ignored. Next thing about dependencies, also in the metadata.json file, the list of supported operating systems. Red Hat 8, or CentOS 8, or CentOS Streams, or Rocky Linux, or however you like to refer to it, got released some time ago. That's not yet listed here. And again, also the operating system versions could be automatically populated into the CI matrix. So it's quite important to add the new operating system here if you would like to use it. And on the other hand, Red Hat 6 is finally that. So you might want to remove it as well. And you need to update the metadata.json again. So you might notice doing a lot of Puppet stuff is basically patching JSON files. And something that's a bit GitHub specific. We have a bunch of labels defined that we would like to use in every modules. At the moment, that's roughly 19. Some of the more famous ones are listed here. Backwards incompatible, beginner friendly, if it's a bug, dogs, or duplicate. Those labels need to be configured on every repository that we have. So why is that important? Every time there is a new issue or a pull request, we would like to add labels to it, because we can filter based on labels in the GitHub API, in the web frontend. And that helps a lot for people to identify pull requests where you as a maintainer might need to take a look because the code is ready and can be reviewed, or you maybe want to mark it as needs work or something, or needs rebase. So the original author needs to take a look again. But also stuff like the backwards incompatible label is important because we pass all those labels when we automatically generate a changelog. So, and if one pull request got closed since the last release with the backwards incompatible label, that means the next release needs to be a major one, not a minor or a bug fix release. Some time ago, people identified that there is some room for automation. Well, since we use Puppet after all, we like automation. And the team at Puppet Labs wrote the module sync tool, which is now fully open sourced and maintained by Vox Pupuli. And module sync allows you to take a Git repository with some templates at a configuration file and apply those templates to a list of other Git repositories. And we use this to manage all the Ruby gems that we maintain, but also all the Puppet modules that we maintain. Because if you look closely at a Puppet module, there are many files that are always the same, they are identical, and sometimes there's just a slight difference between them, so a template would be fine. And that's what we use module sync for. It configures our complete CI pipeline, all the gem file and the rake file that we have with all the Ruby gem dependencies. It checks that a license file is present, that the metadata.json has at least a valid JSON format, that our contributing markdown file is present in every module, which explains to people how they should raise a pull request, what kind of information should be in a pull request. All those files should be kept in sync across all the modules, and the module sync CLI tool is quite helpful for this. And at the moment, it manages roughly 20 files per Puppet module, and that already helps a lot. But this tool needs to be executed from time to time to apply updated templates to other modules. If someone is interested, our repositories are public. The first one, ModuleSync, is for the actual Ruby CLI tool. And we have ModuleSync config, which contains all the templates that we have. The whole tool is not specific to Puppet modules. You can manage every collection of Git repositories that you have, no matter if that's for some Python projects or Ruby gems, Puppet modules, or whatever. That always works in the same way. That's quite neat. And the last bit of yak shaving, I already mentioned that we need to update version ranges for dependencies, but we also need to do releases on our own from time to time. At the moment, we have 142 modules on the Forge available, which is quite a lot. So we need a proper release workflow that is embedded into our CI environment. So somebody just needs to kick off one rake task on their local workstation, and the rest will be handled by the GitHub Actions to publish automatically. But still, that's something that needs to be done, and you need to identify which modules will be released next, what kind of schedule do we have. And sometimes you notice dependencies, like you do one major release here in this module in archive, for example. We have many other modules that depend on archive, so their metadata.json need again to be updated. They need to publish again, stuff like this. So that was all of the yak shaving that we do. But what's the actual purpose of our organization? Well, it's of course to review pull requests. Like, that's what we would like to spend the most of our time to be more efficient. The GitHub UI has some nice features. There's a screenshot from it, so you can filter on pull requests that are open, that are within a specific organization. So that already helps a bit to narrow it down. And the free PRs at the bottom, they all have a green check mark. That means they have some kind of CI, and the CI reported everything is fine. But by default, the GitHub UI doesn't allow you to filter for this. But that might be quite important, because for everything where the CI doesn't pass, the pull request is probably broken, and the people that propose the pull request should look into it and fix the test or their code. Everything that's green is something that should probably be reviewed by someone with merge access. And we did some hacks here that link to the GitHub UI that are able to filter for this, and how that works, I will show you that later. What else do we do? We not only configure labels, as I mentioned earlier, in every repository, we also apply them to all the different issues and all the different pull requests. Here are some example screenshots. So if we see there is some work that needs to be done, obviously the needs work label is quite helpful. Sometimes there is a collection of labels that need to be applied. So in general, the pull request is an enhancement because it makes existing behavior better, but the test fail and something else needs to be updated. For example, documentation in the README or so. And also important, if the tests are fixed, but there is still the test fail label, that's a bit annoying. So it needs to be removed. And yeah, as explained here at the bottom, we use some of the labels to automatically generate the changelog. The enhancement label, bug label, and backwards incompatible are quite important to distinguish between major, minor, and patch releases. Oh yeah, so I had already a slide that explains this. Okay. What else? Email addresses. if you see this small GitHub avatar and a pull request, that means that the email address used in the commit isn't associated with any GitHub account. And that could lead to issues on the long run. So we always ask the people that provided the pull request to update it. And if we get new templates added, we nowadays prefer EPP templates, not ERB templates for new Puppet modules. So if it's an ERB template, we ask the people to rewrite it to EPP because that's more future-proof and it's easier to be tested. So there's a lot of work that we do. Some of this could be automated for sure. That's what the talk is about, but also it's not always easy to identify the modules where you need to work on. For example, you have a few hours of time left on a Sunday afternoon, and you would like to ensure that all the required labels are configured on every repository. Well, first step is to identify all the repositories where the labels are missing. You don't want to check the 250 or whatever GitHub repositories that we have. That's quite annoying and way too much work for a Sunday afternoon. So obviously, automation should be the key here. So we all use Puppet, we love automation, so that should be the way to go. I noticed some time ago, it's important to identify the repositories where we need to work instead of just poking random repositories and see if there's stuff that we can fix or need to be reviewed. So I wrote a very ugly script for it, which is here on my right side. Do not try to read it. It's ugly, it's bad, it's small. Well, the font is small. It's a very ugly script, but it does some checks. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of JSON files that needs to be passed. Well, that's perfectly to be read and validated by some scripts. You don't need to do this with your own eyes. Also, GitHub has an API, which basically provides us all the information that are required for the task I explained in the last 15 minutes. So I wrote this script, which is nice, and it provides me some information on modules where we need to do work in my shell. And I had some discussions with people that are involved heavily in writing proper APIs and tooling in Ruby. And I asked them like, hey, I have this script. Do you have an idea if we can improve this somehow? And he was like, yeah, well, we can try. So 1 year later, basically, we have a dashboard. So what's that? How does it work? What does it do? We wrote a Rails application, a Ruby on Rails application, which pokes the GitHub API for all the information about all the repositories that we have. Thankfully, as I mentioned multiple times, the metadata.json, it's JSON, it provides all the information. And on the first step, we can parse it. We can identify which of the modules, for example, claim to support CentOS, but not CentOS 8 yet. Which of them claim to support Debian, but not Debian 10 yet, or soon Debian 11. So all those information, we can scrape it from the GitHub API and visualize in our dashboard. Awesome. So that's a time saving, incredible to describe. That's really, really helpful. We do not need to poke all the modules anymore. We have just a single source of truth, and we have the dashboard. And because of the GitHub API, it's automatically updated from time to time, and all the information that we need are in this dashboard. So I have a quick walkthrough here. We scrape all the modules on a 6-hour basis at the moment because we have quite a few repositories, and the GitHub API is rate limited, and we don't want to run into any issues. And that works quite good. And we have a bunch of checks here defined. For example, which of the modules need a release, which of them don't support the latest version of any of the operating systems, and all the different chiclets that you see. You can just click on it, go to GitHub. Yeah, quite neat. We also check for the Puppet version range. So if there are any modules that do not yet claim to support Puppet 8, it's also something that can be updated. And the dashboard also has a list of all the open pull requests. So there is no need anymore to fiddle around with the GitHub search to identify all the different issues. So there is that. We poke the GitHub API. But what else do we do? We are no senior experts, and the documentation for the GitHub API is a bit, there is room for improvement. So we just poke our script and see like, okay, what can we do? Does it break? Does it work? It works, nice. And there is this concept of a GitHub application, and that's awesome. What is it? So every time one of you makes a pull request for a Vox Pupuli module, that triggers an event. And you can write an application and register it with GitHub, and GitHub will notify the application about every event. Common event types are, for example, a new comment on an issue or a pull request, a new issue, a closed issue, and you code push to a pull request, or someone just added a label to something. And now our application not only scraped the GitHub API, but it also gets notified about all the events live instantly. And there is no need to scrape it. We do this still as a fallback, but we get all the events. And based on those events, we can poke the API again and trigger stuff. For example, a pull request gets merged. About this merge event, we get a notification. Afterwards, we can check all the other open pull requests and see if they now have a merge conflict based on this other merge pull request. And if that's the case, we can apply a label to it, like needs a rebase, which is nice. But if label is added, the original author doesn't get any notification at all. So we also write a comment to it like, hey, thanks for the pull request. Something else was merged. Could you please rebase? We have some code examples here. So the whole application is written in Ruby, as I mentioned. We got all the different events. You can check on the event type. For example, if it's a pull request, it's always important to filter out events that you created on your own with your own application. Otherwise, you run in a loop and the GitHub API gets mad at you. We did that a few times. Don't try that. And if everything is fine, you can just proceed with processing the requests and do whatever you like to do to the resources. We have a lot of validation implemented to ensure that we don't break the API. And for example, if we would like to configure a label, we first need to check that the label is also configured on the repository. So there are some neat edge cases in the GitHub API documentation. And I've one example. Now here's a new pull request. And you can see the pull request has some merge conflicts, probably because something else was merged. And what our application does is it adds the merge conflicts label, so we can filter on this later on, but it also sends out this neat comment, and people get email notifications about new comments, so the person knows, okay, I need to rebase. And that's also the feature that we used on the earlier link about the CI status. So you cannot filter for the CI status, but you can retrieve it via the GitHub API. And if the CI is green, you can also apply a label, or you can apply something like tests fail, if the CI isn't green, and you can filter on those labels. That's a neat trick and workaround. Our bot is quite good. So if somebody removes a label, but the bot thinks that, well, the label still needs to be there, it gets added again. So that works. But we have one issue. Somewhere in the code, we still have a race condition. And sometimes, as you can see on the bottom, we have almost 0 events coming in. And sometimes something happens and a race condition is triggered. We receive an event, we kick off one, we receive 2 events back. We trigger 4 events, we get 4 notifications back, we trigger 8 new events, dum, dum, dum. And at the end, you have a peak with many events, and then there is the GitHub API rate limit, and everything is dead. So the whole project here is quite new. We are still working on it. It's not perfect yet. There are a few known bugs. And yeah, we are still working with the GitHub support and some Ruby expert from Puppet Labs to figure out where our issue is, to not break the GitHub API anymore. But besides that, the whole concept is quite neat, I think. What else do we do? What are the use cases that we would like to satisfy? There are a few more cases where we could automate labeling or remove labels on issues and pull requests. We would like to implement GitLab API support. And we would also like to see more companies that use this for their internal stuff. We try to ensure that nothing about Vox Pupuli is hard-coded in the source code. At the moment, it talks to the GitHub API that's configurable. So if you have GitHub Enterprise in the cloud, or if you run GitHub Enterprise on-premise, that works out of the box. As mentioned, GitLab API support is planned as well. So it shouldn't matter if you are any open source organization with public repositories where you have a bunch of stuff to configure, or if you just have a huge operations team that maintains many Git repositories, or any developer teams. Our goal is that our lives get easier and we have more time for actual code reviews with this application, and I think we are on a pretty good way here. Vox Pupuli, I think, is quite a good organization, a very good community. So if you're interested, feel free to contribute. The whole application you can check out on voxpupu.li. But as I mentioned, still work in progress. So sometimes we restart different background services, so it might be down or get back up, or not 100% up to date because of the rate limits. But you can also check out the source code that we have, or the Docker containers that we built. They're all linked in the README. And yeah, I think that's it from my part. And yeah, thanks for your attention.